Hello, everyone. I'm Julia Valentine. I am here with my amazing strategic partners and esteemed friends. They've really come up with something revolutionary that we are so excited to tell people about and tell family offices about. And most importantly, wonderful people, fantastic people that if you don't know them, please get to know them because you'll be so happy. So, um, let me start with the introductions. Well, first of all, welcome to the Digital Stewardship in a Modern Family Office from Data Risk to Strategic Oversight with Orca. And I would like to start with introductions. Tomas is the founder and CEO of Orca AG. He's based in Zurich, Switzerland. He founded Orca in 2017 based on a personal use case in his wife's single family office. And we're going to ask him what exactly that personal use case is. Do you want to know? He spent his entire working life in startups, including two IPOs. Okay, one failure, we're not going to mention that. On the
Thank
day
you.
that his son was born, he took the leap of faith himself by starting Orca. Um, so yeah, because why not add to your risks as you're having a newborn? Of course, we all do that. And then
As if life isn't challenging enough for a first-time parent, right? It was why not
exactly,
do it all at the
exactly.
same time?
Yeah, but that's when you realize that you really need to set it up for them, right? And make their life easier a little bit. Okay. So, and Charmaine Tang is the CEO of Orca Americas, the US subsidiary of Orca AG. She's based in Dallas and New York. And Charmaine has 25 years of investment and private banking experience because she started in kindergarten, working with family offices and other complex clients. And together with Tomas and the Orca team, the US is now Orca's largest market. And I am going to ask both of you, so what is Orca? Please give your definition of what it is to you and to the market.
Ladies first.
You know what? I was going to have founder first, and then I'll go client use case from my side. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Tomas.
very happy to do so. So Orca is when we started the company, we didn't know what to call it. We've subsequently learned that what we do is most widely referred to as entity management. And what that means is really we try and be the single source of truth for all of the information about the legal structure that a family has, trusts, entities, bank accounts, board memberships, powers of attorney, marriages, divorces, anything that is of legal relevance to a family. We want to be the place that you'd come and look for that. And that's otherwise referred to as entity management, but I think we came up with a lot of cooler names for what it is over the years. But I'll let Charmaine maybe round off some other information about how we would refer to ourselves.
Yes. So I would take it from the family office client side. So again, when I started in my career in kindergarten, serving family offices from some of the largest firms, JP Morgan and the like, it was very clear that a lot of these families, the confluence of two things. One is the generational shift, which we hear a million times over, which sort of triggers the question of what do we own? What is in the family office and the enterprise and transparency of that information. Definitely a challenge. To the actual use cases, I do want to share a little bit about the founder case of Orca is that, founded by 10 founding family offices or started that way. These family offices shared a similar problem, right? Solving to organize what has quickly become between, amassing assets, multi-jurisdictional, family members all over the world, as well as just increased complexity in investment and asset classes, right? The proliferation of sort of private investing really made a case for making, I call it in America, the sense out of spaghetti, being able to see that. And Orca is a solution for that. So Orca to me is something that is incredibly helpful to clients. And I get really excited, especially for rising gen who are coming into their family offices.
Wonderful. Tomas, back to you. Would you please share more with us? Share a little bit more about Orca, about the founder's story, about the inspiration behind it.
Absolutely happy to do so. So, as mentioned, when Julie was introducing me, Orca was founded based on an insight I gained in my wife's single family office. My wife's a fifth generation family member of a fairly substantial European business. In her generation, it kind of went from the fourth to the fifth generation. It exploded, or I should say, from the third to the fifth generation, it really exploded in terms of the number of family members as well as the complexity. It went from a single beneficial owner in G3 who had 8 children across 3 different marriages. And those 8 children, of which my wife is the daughter of the eldest son, then had many, many more children. So my wife herself is one of 6 from just her part of the family, and there are a lot of other parts of the family by now. So this was sort of my first insight into what it meant to be associated with a family office, is this living, breathing example I have through my wife. And I've always been, I'd say, at a safe distance from it all, being someone who's married and not a specific family member. But when my wife and I did get married, I got a lot more involved explicitly because she then relocated to Switzerland, which is where I'm based, in order that we could live together. And going through the process of clarifying if she could move to Switzerland, what were the implications of moving to Switzerland from a legal perspective, and so forth, and mainly from a tax perspective, I was in the room with the lawyers when we were reviewing that. And I was there as someone who was basically there to understand and translate for my wife a number of the different things that were being discussed, and also to try and help this process. And it was chaos. It was absolute chaos. My wife's family business has, a lot of legal entities across a lot of countries, and the family members had never needed to have an overview of everything. So there wasn't an overview of everything, which meant we were the first people entrusted with gathering all of this information together. And it was unique because we're not subject matter experts, but we were sitting in between the family office and the legal advisors who were sitting in Switzerland. The legal advisors had never met my wife, knew nothing about the family business at all, and we needed to get them from 0% to 100% understanding, as we were essentially doing the same thing ourselves. So my wife obviously knew the family business, knew a lot of anecdotes from the family business. Her father ran the thing for 40 plus years in the CEO and chairman position, but she didn't know the legal granularity of everything. And this involved essentially us gathering information from a lot of different people and piecing it all together, trying to make sense of it all, and then trying to pass it on to the lawyers in a structured format so that they themselves didn't have to spend time making sense of it, but they got a really structured, really complete data set, and they could just get down to the business of giving legal advice, not trying to sort through papers themselves. And that was unique because my wife and I were really doing this for the first time. I had spent my working life building technology and had enough of a knowledge of how to structure databases to understand the complexity of the information that we were trying to gather and share with others. And it was very difficult for us to make sense of it. It was very difficult for us to map it out in a way that we thought would help other people make sense of it. And we did our best in terms of, we did a structure diagram in PowerPoint so that we had a sort of, we call it the 30,000-foot view. We, get it on a page at least. We had a lot of additional information that would have been way too much for PowerPoint in Excel sheets. So lists of people's powers of attorney, EIN numbers, things like this, valuations. And then we had documents. I don't even want to say where the documents were. They were all over the place. This legal advisor has those. They drafted them. This is a co-investment that was done with this family member. I hope they have a copy of it. This lives in my inbox. I think I have the physical copy somewhere, under the pillowcase or wherever else. So we were doing all of this and did a decent enough job of it. I say my wife and I have a healthy amount of OCD, which contributed maybe to we were actually quite happy doing a lot of this as it went along. But at the end of it, you realize how much time and energy was spent pulling that together. And you also realize that whilst my wife may have been the first family member who needed to do that, subsequently, a load of them have had to do that. And that was, on the one hand side, because her family became more and more international. You had more family members moving abroad. Unluckily for the family office, they all moved to different countries, which meant everyone needed to get a lawyer from 0 to 100 in each instance. And unluckily, not only for the family office, but I think for all of us globally, the tax, legal, and compliance landscape has just gotten more and more complex year by year. I live in Switzerland, and opening a bank account 20, 30 years ago here, you'd show up with a handful of cash and they'd be happy to assist. Nowadays, you almost feel like they don't want the business. I was talking to a legal advisor yesterday, or not a legal advisor, a banker in New York City who does a lot of cross-border stuff. And he was saying it's gotten to the stage where they have to ask prospective clients which schools they went to now. It keeps, every time you think it's gotten to the maximum amount, it just, the bar keeps going up. So Orca's origin story was really a one-time, incredibly painful experience pulling information together, an understanding of the fact that this wasn't going to be a one-time thing going forward. It was going to happen to more people more frequently. Also understanding, given that this was my wife's personal example, what a high stakes game this is. If you are crossing a border or engaging in any other of these legal tax and compliance matters, and you are not dotting the I's and crossing the T's, perfectly, you are running the risk of misdeclaring something which can get you in very hot water quickly. And once you're in the bad books of any of these, counterparties, it's not quickly that you'll get out of them again. So we had all of this insight. I had enough of an understanding of databases and the way that technology was moving to understand that there could be an entirely new way of doing this. And that was what Orca was on day one. It was really the understanding that there could be a much, much better way of organizing information, specifically legal, tax, and compliance information, to enable people to have really productive discourse about it. And I think it's very, when I talk about productive discourse around legal, tax, and compliance, I think one of the other things that made this such a compelling problem to solve from Orca's perspective was that legal, tax, and compliance are notoriously collaborative. You have to talk to a lot of different people. My wife and I would not have been able to identify if she could move to Switzerland without engaging several external advisors. We're currently going through the process of analyzing our personal setup and have had to involve multiple law firms to get comparative perspectives because things are getting more complicated. One person wants to solve it this way and one person wants to solve it this way. So we understood that this is a high stakes game. We understood that you need to collaborate, whether it's I need to share information with a banker to open a bank account, or I need to share it with someone who's going to talk succession with me, or it's about getting a lending facility against a Lombard credit against an asset or against a piece of real estate or something. The amount of times you need to share legal, tax, and compliance information with external stakeholders is substantial. And that's what we set out to do on day one. And it's a bit of a mouthful, but
It's wonderful. It's wonderful. It's sort of like you went through the project and you automated it in such a way that it's easier for everyone else to do that, which is fabulous, right? Because I couldn't find one person who would be happy going through this without some kind of, you know what I mean? Like with a spreadsheet. Not that I'm sure that people have tried, no doubt, but not the best way of doing it. Sure.
Thank you, Julie. I think we lovingly call it the necessary evils, right? I think I'm excited about tax, legal, and compliance information, but I don't think many other people are. But whether we want to or not, it is a
Absolutely. You
necessary
have no
evil, right?
choice. Absolutely. You have no choice. And if you need to update something, you want to run one query and figure out what needs to get updated, right? Rather than going through it by hand. So many, many different use cases. I'm sure you're going to bring that up later on. But right now, Charmaine, um, I'd like to talk to you about what you see in the US, because you speak to a lot of family offices in the US and, of course, internationally. So, what are the themes that you are seeing, especially given that family offices are modernizing, they don't want to do this by hand. They don't want to just forward a bunch of emails to their attorneys and tax advisors, right? And do cross-border taxation kind of on the phone. So, what are you seeing, and any anecdotes that you could share with us to just provide examples?
Sure, sure. Happy to share. It's a great topic. Love sitting in the US. So I sit in Dallas and New York. We see a broad swath. Orca itself is in 30 different countries. But again, with the US, we really get an interesting cross-section of family offices. But I'd say thematically, we see on one end, obviously, the very large institutional style family offices. But oftentimes on the other side, we see very lean teams, still single family offices. And then we also have what many people know are called embedded family offices, right? And an embedded family office being, family run business enterprise and leveraging, sort of staff overlaying into the family office. So that's the spectrum we see. I'd say specifically, the good news is there's modernization. So it's here on the very sophisticated side. We see sophisticated tech stacks. Typical stack would be what we would call, an accounting system, a GL, a investment performance tool, call add a par black diamond of the sort of the CIO tool. And we like to say Orca sits, as Tomas says, in the glamorous world of legal, tax, and compliance and dynamic entity management. But what's interesting to see across the board is everyone's goal in general, what we see is constantly trying to professionalize, get more efficient, and modernize across a number of themes. So again, in the years that I've been with Orca, what's been really nice to see is, there's lots of family office specific software. And so again, if I reflect back on almost 4 years with Orca, a lot of it was just understanding, the family offices saying, have you heard of so and so? And what does so and so do versus so and so? So sort of defining that competitive and marketplace for family office software solutions. Since then, my observation certainly is that the family offices kind of have greater awareness of what these products do. I think the market's much more transparent. There's some natural sort of leaders in these spaces. But I think now it's shifted more to sort of strategic modernization, right? What do we want in our stack? What do we want that stack to do? Is it, are we going to bring in outsourced third-party consultants to help us strategize? Do we need a team outsourced or in-house to implement? A lot of those sort of overarching themes come to play. And then I think what's really nice in the family office space in the States for sure, I do see collaborative conversations between family offices. I think rather than being sort of inside your own echo chamber and being secretive and private, I'm definitely seeing more conversation around modernization and technology. I was going to highlight like a couple sort of more tactical
Mhm.
themes that have really come up though as of late. So AI, of course, right? So maybe a few years ago it was sort of this wait and see, let's see what everyone's doing. But now I think, the time is here. It's a must-have. Family offices are, I say embracing is a strong word, but certainly having to understand and get there, instead of dipping a toe, we're like swimming in there now. Cyber and privacy, definitely more always a conversation. I saw a stat actually that nearly one third of family offices have experienced a cyber attack.
Yeah.
Anecdotally, I've talked to several family offices that have, oftentimes manifesting like a bank pretending to need a signature and approval, or a wire transfer, as we hear all the time. And then I think a couple other things. I touched on outsourcing, but I think the last thing that comes up a lot is data hygiene. Tomas and I, we hosted a family office roundtable, and it does come up: data hygiene, data governance, things like that. Because in one way, garbage in, garbage out.
Yep.
Also governing that data, who has access, and I would just put a final fine point on a specific example. I could kind of talk ad nauseum on this topic, but you ask, do I have an anecdote? So a great anecdote is a family office, we'll just call it in the southern region. It's an embedded one. They have 8 operating companies ranging from industrial to consumer. Principal is, late 50s. He's a G1, and his children are now stepping into the business. And pretty much the functions were embedded in sort of the legal, tax and compliance operating businesses. They hired their attorney from outside counsel. That general counsel is now the head of the family office, and it's really been interesting to see them leverage technology to really make that clear governance, true sort of fiduciary line between the two entities. But we're seeing that ad nauseum and sort of across the country. But that's a classic. We're starting a family office, and how do we start to parse that out? We certainly see this also oftentimes in private equity principals as well in the East Coast.
Very interesting. Tomas, what is digital stewardship? How do you define it? It's the title of our webinar today. What is digital stewardship, and why is it important for family offices?
Yeah, I think that's a really that is exactly why it's the title of today's conversation, because I think it's a really important question to answer. And I think maybe before I answer the question, I'd say why it's more important now than it has potentially been in the past, right? I think Charmaine was pointing to the fact that there is a lot more technology out there. There's a lot of family office specific technology out there, which is great, because this is an audience who can benefit massively from any type of efficiency that the technology can provide. And there's also, Charmaine had mentioned AI coming out, right? And this new technology that exists to make people's lives easier, whether it's AI or whether it's family office technology, what it's essentially doing is it's taking all of the information a family might have and trying to store it somewhere in a way that makes it accessible to those that need it, and ideally doesn't make it accessible to those who don't need it, right? And I think that is it's very easy to look at technology and say, oh, if we use it, it can, we'll benefit from time saved here, insights gained there, and so on and so forth. But what is the risk behind it? And I think explicitly now, I saw a great post yesterday about Claude AI, and it was something along the lines of, I had uploaded not me, but anecdotally, this individual had uploaded a lease agreement to Claude to ask it some specific questions about it. And the responses that they were getting didn't seem particularly relevant to the document that they'd uploaded. And they said, well, wait for a second, Claude, can you show me the document that you're talking about? And it showed them someone else's lease agreement. And so I think when we speak to family offices, there is a ginormous focus on privacy. And specifically, when we talk about tax, legal, and compliance information, I personally would say that is the most sensitive information that a family has. That would include people's home addresses, their social security numbers, EINs, board members, all of the types of things that is really going to be a big source of data that is of substantial. If that gets in the wrong hands, you have a serious issue. If my balance sheet from my balance sheet from my accounting system gets in someone's hands, I obviously don't want that to happen, but it's not going to be potentially as sensitive or as risky for me as an individual. So I would just point to the fact that with more technology comes a lot of opportunity, but with more technology also, depending on who you choose and how you use the technology, can come the risk side of things. And I think that risk is being amplified by AI, because what AI is doing, it's offering so much convenience, it's offering so much functionality that it's encouraging people to upload information in a much more extensive way than they've ever done before, right? I mean, I used to, if I wanted to use technology 15 years ago, it meant the chicken interface. It meant finding someone who was going to manually enter all of the data that we thought was relevant into some system of record, which made people didn't add as much information because it was just too inefficient and time consuming. And because it didn't have a lot of information in the system, or didn't have all of the information in the system, you couldn't use it to answer as many questions as you can nowadays. With AI, it's incredibly easy to put data in, because I throw anything I have in any format that I have in there, and I can expect much more comprehensive outcomes and responses. So it's kind of encouraged people to put more in. And what we've seen in a number of offices is, let's say the office hasn't yet adopted AI, but some of the staff members might have, right? It's like, oh God, I have to do this now. It's Friday. I'm about a half hour away from, cocktails, and I have to do something now. I could speed up this if I was just going to leverage, ChatGPT, Claude, etc. And it's incredibly difficult to stop that from happening. Unless you have a serious IT infrastructure in which you have a lot of controls over everyone's devices, which is not a setup we'll see in all family offices. So I think there's a lot of risk nowadays that shadow systems exist. And so data stewardship, data governance for us is making sure that you avoid that you don't have all of these shadow systems, making sure that you have a couple focused, concentrated areas where you say, we are collectively using this. We've chosen it on the one hand side because it gives us the functionality that we need. We've also chosen it conscientious of the fact that it'll enable us to achieve our goals in a way that is both privacy and security preserving. And I think this is something that family offices are good at. They're very, very good at putting privacy as a top priority. Where it can struggle is to hold to that mantra, right? I mean, we talk to a lot of family offices. We've been doing this for a number of years now globally. I would say hands down, there's not a jurisdiction we operate in or an office we've spoken to who hasn't asked us to go through serious, review of our security. It's become more and more common these days that we'll actually go and talk to an external consultant who's advising the family office, and we have to go through an extensive infosec before the families will go ahead. So I think all of that is phenomenal and works really well. And that is I guess just sort of highlighting the trend that I think family offices take this very seriously. I think we've noticed that it's even more seriously taken in the last couple of years because of the increase of offices asking us to jump through multiple hoops, which I would highly encourage everyone to do. And I would, at the same point in time, if someone doesn't want to do that, then that's a good reason to reconsider if you'd like to work with them or not. And the other element of, let's say, data governance, sovereignty, etc., is for us, and Charmaine had also mentioned this earlier, is data cleanliness. So nowadays, with the advent of AI and a lot of people will come and say, oh, awesome, we have AI, it'll do everything we want it to do. AI is as good as the information that it has access to, and the more structured that data set is, and the more complete that data set is, the more you'll be able to use not only AI, but any application whether it's conventional SaaS or AI or some other application that you're looking to run. So I think the security, I'm not willing to put anything in until I know that it's from my eyes only. Once I've committed to something, it's fully committing to it and putting all of the information in there. And when I have it in there, saying, look, we have a system that can do this. We don't need shadow systems, and enforcing some type of oversight to make sure that those shadow systems don't come about, because it is easier and easier nowadays. You used to have to, let's say, download an application, install an application, and you could easily prevent a device from being able to do that. Nowadays, you can do so many things in the browser, and it's very, I remember what it was like working in finance when they would block Facebook, or they'd block, God only knows what they block nowadays. But back then, Facebook was a perfect example, right? We couldn't do a lot of things on our devices. And when I worked in finance, we also didn't have laptops. We were in desktops. You left the office, you had a BlackBerry you could email on. That was a big jazzy thing at the time, right? But it was like the amount of mobility that people have now with bring your own device, working from anywhere, all this sort of stuff. It really means a lot more effort is required around making sure we use only the systems we agreed upon, making sure those systems meet strict security and otherwise standards. And when we're using those systems, if we do want to really benefit from the software, having a big focus on the cleanliness of data, etc. And I think as someone who's building software for this audience and foreseeing a lot of these issues, we've also tried, and there's a number of softwares that do this really well, to ensure data cleanliness and data completion, right? If I give the example of a GL, an accounting system, a GL is by nature always built to balance the books. And accountants are incredibly good at making sure that there's not a cent or a nickel or a dime missing, whether it's over $1 million or $1 billion, right? Some systems are inherently good at helping users understand when they've achieved a goal and when the data is clean, and other systems are not. And I think there's more and more systems nowadays that are trying to add elements that will help people understand, is the information that you've put in this system complete, actionable, all of those things. I think I talked on like 20, 30 different topics, but it'll just hit
no, this is perfect. This is perfect, because let's help formulate and pose questions for family offices that they can ask themselves, and it will help them kind of think it through, right? So the first one, you hit on role-based permissioning, right? So there are different roles, and you have permissions to view a certain amount of data in certain places. And it's a struggle for any family office, because the first response that you're going to get is, we are short-staffed. We don't have 100 people. We have very few people. And so if you limit our permissions, and if you implement a true role-based permissioning by the book, this office is not going to function. There's 8 of us, right? So the question that you ask yourself in regards to that is what?
Well, I'd love to. I'll answer that with some specific examples. So the first thing is, I would agree with you entirely. Most family offices are, as Charmaine had mentioned earlier, sort of lean teams.
Yes.
And in the lean teams, people wear 20, 30 hats each, right? And those hats can move from day to day from one to the other. And so it's very difficult to take, let's say, an enterprise level approach to rights management, because the way that, McDonald's will manage their God knows how many employees who would have access to that, there, each person wears one hat, right? Or maximum 2. And it's a very different problem set when you have it in a family office. What we've seen in the family office has been really interesting. So what specific to legal and tax and compliance technology, and we said at the beginning, it's a high stakes game. A distinction between 50% ownership and 50.1% can mean all the difference, right? So we're working with data that should be flawlessly accurate. And as such, there's a big, big, big focus on ownership of information. I
Mm-hmm.
think there's two ways that we've seen that approached. One is, how much accountability does the software have? Is there a way to see who did what when? Because if there's a way to see who did what when, you can be somewhat more liberal with permissioning because everyone knows that
There's
no
an
matter
audit
what they did,
trail. We know
there's
it's
an audit
you.
trail,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So I
Uh-huh.
think that
Yeah.
breeds accountability. That is very, very, very helpful in a lot of ways. The second thing is, if you do have a lean team and you are operating in an environment where data, let's say accuracy is very important because it's a high stakes game, we've still seen people take the approach that they say, look, one person has to take full ownership of this. So we are not going to share the burden of this
Mm-hmm.
because it is so important. We're nervous about having multiple chefs in the kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
And we have instances of that in some of the offices that we serve where an individual person is taking care of well in excess of 1,000 legal entities. And that poor individual is the recipient of every single change. Oh, we just changed the board here. I'm going to send this document to that person. They have to take care of it, right? And at the same point in time, they get all the information and need to keep the system up to date. At the same point in time, they're often the person who gets asked, oh, could you remind me of who has signatory rights here or who's on the board there? So they become a natural bottleneck. And what we've seen in our development of Orca was the following two things. That individual wants to be the source of truth and wants to be the let's say governor of all of the clean data, but they just want some type of systematic support. So with Orca, what we've been able to do is, for example, instead of sending someone a document, they have to open that document, they have to read that document, they have to see what's changed in the structure and manually key it in. Our system can now automatically extract data from the documents, and they just need to review it before it goes into the system. And they want to be there. They want to be that human in the loop. And it was put really eloquently by one of our clients the other day. They want to go from a doer to a checker. And if I can go from being a doer to a checker, you've likely cut down my workload by a factor of 20 or something like this, right? So
Yep.
what you can do is I think, and that comes to understanding the burden of maintenance, right? So that just to answer your question again from the beginning, one, accountability. If we have a lot of accountability, we can have loads of people in the system and we can have loads of chefs in the kitchen. We'll know that everyone will act accordingly, knowing that there's oversight. And
Mm-hmm.
number two is, if I did want to stick with, one person has to own this, how easy is it to maintain the data? And can they be, for example, AI enabled? I think those are two developments we've definitely seen. I don't know, Charmaine, if you want to add anything on top of that.
Yeah, I mean, ditto, but yeah, and adding, there's a champion, but it's also the onus on the team to, what we're saying is sort of deriving an overarching strategy, right? Forward looking. Is the data clean, to Tomas's point, but also who's responsible for what. But then behind that, this actually happened this week with a family office we talked to here in the West, was internally. So finding a solution, the example was Orca, because that's what we were talking about. But then it was the legal team, it was the chief operating officer, it was a paralegal, and it was a principal on the call, having to go back internally and make decisions on who's responsible for what, but also rowing in the same direction, right? And almost, I would say, upending, but creating standard operating procedures. That's
Around
coming up a lot
system,
as well, right?
groundwork.
Because you can have a
Yeah.
strategy here,
Yeah.
you can have a champion, but all of those things can't fall on one person. You need that point person, but having the procedures beneath that foundationally to get it to the point where it's, maintenance is always a question too, right? Okay, we have all these wonderful structures, but
Yeah.
how do we build this in a way it's sustainable going forward? And not a drain on the team, but an operational, exponential efficiency improvement.
I,
Excellent, excellent points. And I want to go back for just a second about what you were saying about AI. And what are your thoughts on why there's kind of like this blind spot that we all have about privacy of data? And over the last 20 years or so, I was watching this blind spot where um, an office that I observed personally was shredding every single piece of paper. No, seriously, full-time person
Yeah.
standing there shredding. In the meantime, people are walking out with their laptops, with the tape that doesn't have a security code, right? Because, like,
Mhm.
somehow, when first we get introduced to portable devices, right, or tapes for backup and all that, we just don't think of the digitally stored data in the same way that we think about a physical piece of paper. Now, there's another blind spot with Claude and AI. It's a complete blind spot. I mean, I know CISOs who are just, putting all the data in there, don't even change the settings on their chat GPT that says don't put my data into general population, right? And all of that. What are your thoughts of, I'm sure you witnessed this, all of these blind spots. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the to sort of paraphrase what you were saying, it's are people like it's getting very easy to put data in a lot of different systems, and people aren't necessarily as aware
Mhm.
of in how many digital places their data lives
Yeah.
when they would have physically known, right? Physically, we had one document in one manila binder, and if we shredded it, it was gone, and we knew we had no more exposure. Whereas any document that's ever been in an email as an attachment is available in many different places. And it's basic, and I think the thing is, it's this one-way street. Once it's out, right? It's not that you can't gain control of something once it's left your environment. And email is a phenomenal example because there's still a ginormous amount of data that goes via email, and that passes through multiple hands before it goes from the sender to the recipient. And I still like the example that an email is like sending a postcard and not a registered letter, right? It's literally going through all those different hands, and
Mhm.
everywhere along the way it can be intercepted. So I would 100% say yes, we've seen people quickly lose sight of how much and
Mhm.
how much digital information of theirs has gone into many different locations. It's Are you asking us how to solve it, Julia, or just
No, no. What are your yeah, it would be awesome if you could please answer the question once and for all, because how do we how do we solve this? And where are we going in terms of, even in terms of our fiduciary responsibility, right? Because at some point we begin to realize as um, family office executives and as family office principals that at some point this is not funny anymore, and it's not a tech problem, and it's not necessarily a cyber, something for your virtual CISO, or your CTO to resolve. That at some point it's gonna become our fiduciary responsibility, and we need to somehow oversight it, or at least have some tools to oversight it.
I can think of a really good example of some clients of ours where so they're not living in the world that you've just described, where they can take devices out, etc. So we have some of our clients are trust firms. The one example I'm going to give now explicitly is in Liechtenstein, and they are mandated to have everything on-prem, and I don't think anything can be accessed by the team members the moment that they leave the office, with the exception, I believe, of the CEO and the chief relationship manager. And when they do leave the office, it's generally to go, I mean, home, obviously, or to go and visit the clients that they serve. And
Mhm.
if they're traveling internationally, what they will do is they will, for example, make a client presentation. They'd have, for example, a structure chart, But in that structure chart, they will use internal code names for all of the individuals and all of the entities. And I think
Wow.
that's something that we've seen a lot in different family offices. You'll often have team members using alphanumeric codes because they're so familiar with the booking codes from the general ledger or whatever systems that they're using that they know exactly which entity that they're
Mhm.
talking about, right? I've seen people in the finance departments who can recite, an IBAN is like a 16 digit alphanumeric code for bank accounts in Europe. And they just know the IBANs off by heart. Anyway, so one of the elements is when you take information out of a system, do you
Mhm.
need to preserve all of the original full legal names? Or if you're sending it to someone who knows you well enough, you can send it with the abbreviated names. So I think there's some of it is understanding I do have to share information. Information is going to get out. It's not capable for us to have everything purely within our own Chinese wall. That being said, when the information leaves our environment and goes to whoever it needs to go to, does it need to be, could it not be encoded somehow? And I don't mean encoded as in encrypted. It could be in plain text, but if it doesn't have any full legal names, if it just has, orca, shark, bluefin tuna, etc., and Charmaine and I know what we're talking about, and no one else does.
Right.
I think that's one potential approach to that. Um,
So you have plenty of advice for your clients as they're deploying the system as to how to really, maintain the security of it, right? In transit, at
yes,
rest.
so
Yeah.
we have a feature, it's called incognito mode. So you can literally be on screen and you hit a little eye and it's nice. The icon then goes from an eye that's open to an eye that's shut, and it takes all of the names and it replaces those with a very specific set of abbreviations. So it'll always use the same abbreviation for this person, it'll for the family member, it's always use the same abbreviation for the legal entity, etc. And that helps people to share information outside of the confines of the office without being concerned that anyone who's not supposed to understand it would understand it.
I understand. Okay. Charmaine, a question for you. Give us an example, please. Something that you've seen where the lack of focus on this, has maybe gotten out of hand, or something where you were able to really witness that and make some recommendations and implement some changes that were required.
Sure. I, maybe I'll make an amalgamation of examples, but yeah, certainly Tomas and I sit in a very unique seat where we wear the clothing of Orca, but we're privy to a lot of conversations that range from very personal, in some cases could be even territorial. We've always done it this way, sort of
Mhm.
conversations, all the way to a very technical implementation, how do we execute, etc. Um, it is not uncommon for us to hear, again, earlier this week, we did a meeting, and this is a situation where there's a room full of binders, the Bibles for the different things for the family members and for the operating companies,
Mhm.
all paper. Um, and so we see that. And while that's organized, there's a whole, huge project of in this case, it's not even in digital format necessarily uniformly. So that is, believe it or not, we still see the sort of file cabinet situation. That's not abnormal. We have a client who actually, Orca became the impetus for them to really, it lit a fire under their, what, because they knew they were moving to a new office and they had something in order of like, I don't know, 20 file cabinets, Tomas, something like that, that really urged, okay, not only do we need to scan these documents, but we have to have no shadow systems on documents. We have to agree on a file structure. We have to
Mhm.
agree how we're going to put things in Orca. And so that is where you see sort of 0 to 60 pretty quickly because there's going
Mhm.
to be a catalyst, right, to professionalize that. We do see some complexity also once. the software is great and they're in there, but a really big thing is just continuing to keep data clean, but keeping people engaged. I think it's really important to have not just the education at the onset of taking on, sort of anything that's related to digital stewardship
Mhm.
once you create a strategy, but also continuing to educate not only new team members, but technology is moving quickly. So we also see use cases evolving. So it might be fine today, but in a week from a business side, you've opened 10 more entities. And oh, by the way, you can scan documents and extract data from AI and sort of just it's fluid. So it's not a one and done. I think you can feel real like you get your control around things and then something else changes. So we're also seeing it's not messy, but it certainly requires an element of adaptability and willingness to continue to change. The other last thing I think is the people thing, what I alluded to. Roles are not set, right? We're not siloed. A CEO, a COO, any family office executive's not living in their department. Not only do they have to be unified, but to Tomas's point, they're not only sharing information to the outside, they're sharing inside the confines of the family office. And again, that goes back to Tomas talked about the shadow systems, Excel files, who has that Excel file to this Excel file, who's tracking
Mhm.
this? And in some cases, people are tracking the same thing, just in different files. So I think, the overarching comment is it parallels what Tomas was talking about, but we also see it from the inside of family offices across the board.
Thank you, Charmaine. Tomas, if a family office realizes that they have a lot of ungoverned data, it's all over the place, and they wanted to bring you in, what are the first couple of steps for them to think about, right? Like, how would you talk them through, here's your roadmap for a year, but here's where you start?
Yeah, absolutely. So we found it's very helpful when people are thinking of engaging in the digitization of the office, right? We like to start top down. And when I say
Mhm.
top down, I don't mean, let's start with the first legal entity that's directly under the UBOs and go into full depth with that before we go down. We will, I think a good analogy is like how you paint, right? And I'm not a painter, but I gather that when you paint the Mona Lisa or thereabouts, you don't start by perfectly drawing the ear and then perfectly drawing, the right shoulder. You start with a broad outline and you add fidelity as you go. And so our version of that within Orca is to start with the structure chart. So all you basically need is boxes and lines and not even percentages on day one, although of course you could add percentages. And one of the good things about starting with a structure chart is it's very quick and easy to do. You can literally do it in one sitting. There's no need to plan, multiple days or weeks to get that up and running. And in the process of doing it, you have a very visual feedback mechanism. So it's very quick and easy to sort of validate with it. Okay, I sat down. I had a friend of mine whose father at some stage brought his son into the business. And the father said to the son who knew very little about the business up until that stage, said, I'd like you to start by writing my will. And the son was like, oh my God, okay. Well, so he wrote down everything he was aware of. And then the father came and said, well, you're missing this, you're missing this, you're missing this, you're missing this. And the structure chart is a bit like that. You could literally go to someone and say, jot down everything you think you know of. It's a really structured way of doing it. I think, we have
Mhm.
this and that's under there. It helps to do it in a structured way. It's not just a random list of things. You're kind of working through something layer by layer. And if you've done that, and let's say you've spent a couple of hours on it and you show it to someone else, they can tell you within minutes if it's complete or missing something. So it's this is our first, let's say, quick win. And once
Mhm.
you've done that, I would personally call that the skeleton. Then the bone structure, the size of the thing, this and that. And then you start to layer on information. And the way that Orca was built, and it comes to something Charmaine was talking about earlier with standard operating procedures. Orca has a module that can analyze that skeleton and then tell you what you should be adding on top of it. right?
Oh,
Okay,
how
well,
nice.
if you have a trust, then you will need to outline all of the beneficiaries, the primaries, the secondaries, the trustees, etc. You'll need the trust deed and all this sort of stuff. So the system just needs a very basic understanding of the structure, super high level diagram, and it can then come and tell you what you should layer on top of it. And I would say that makes it manageable for people. That makes it structured for people, and it gives them a lot of quick wins on the way, which is obviously really helpful to keep the ball rolling as they go. So it's not certainly not months and years. It's much easier than that nowadays. Even with AI, we wouldn't start by just telling someone to throw all this stuff in an unstructured way. We do like to map out that high level overview so that we can then go into it layer by layer. But of course, with AI, once you've got that layer outloaded, you can just throw in documents. And if the system had previously told you that there was 150 things you needed to do, you chuck in 50 docs, it'll do that to a large extent for you, and then you only have to do 100 things manually thereafter.
Wonderful. Charmaine, how will the digital stewardship, the concept that we've just been discussing today, how is this going to define the difference between family offices that are going to be in the forefront um, of being a modern family office, being tech savvy, right? And the difference between those and families that will struggle with the risks and kind of maybe even being reactive to cleaning up the exposure that results from these risks.
Yeah, I think looking into the future in terms of digital stewardship for family offices,
Mm-hmm.
it used to be the concept of anything digital or tech falls into the IT world that is way out the window for many years now. But I
Mm-hmm.
think forward-looking things again are moving at such a fast clip. And if there's not alignment between, let's say, the humans, right, the humans for whom the family office was built, as well
Mm-hmm.
as the executives and the team who are executing everything. You have to really go back to why was the family office created? It was really to,
Yeah,
it's
yeah, very
protection, it's
true.
privacy, and it's legacy and sustainability. And so, I think having that purpose bit, just continuing to have buy-in internally as well as a strategy, just, strategies, again, not set in stone, but it certainly provides a
Mhm.
framework reiterating constantly. And I honestly, I'd cap that with constant education and communication with all parties involved. That's what's going to keep the family offices moving forward, current and vibrant, not being sort of left behind, being flexible and being adaptable.
Tomas, would you
Yeah.
like to add and any final words of your thoughts, advice, going forward steps, things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going over our specific agenda. Where is the sensitive
Yeah.
data? Who has access? The true exposure? Are we operating at institutional standards or informal convenience? I mean, I think those are all the right questions to be asking. And I think those sound like simple questions. They can be more complicated to answer, especially when you have data in multiple places, inside the office, outside the office, all this sort of stuff. I think if I was going to summarize it in as few words as possible, I think you have to, just like, people do a lot of due diligence before they engage with a lawyer and they build trusted relationship before they will share information. They'll start sharing a little and they'll build from that, etc. I would say technology has to be dealt with the same. Technology is to be seen nowadays essentially as a team member, right? If technology works well, that's what it's doing. It's augmenting the team, it's helping them be better, etc. You need to treat it like a team member. If you have a great, what do you call it? Not reference checks, but like you do criminal background checks for all your staff members, you should be doing something similar for the technology as well, right? So I think we would just highlight that. You were asking earlier for explicit questions to ask. I think a really good one for me is the data encrypted? I think almost everyone will say yes. My in the follow-on question I would encourage everyone to ask is, who has the keys to decrypt it? Often it's
Yeah.
the user and the provider and potentially some other third parties.
Mhm.
Nowadays there's a couple software providers, ourselves included, who've made sure that the client is the only one with the key. And you can do a lot of things nowadays in very different technical ways. So, sort of long story short, I think those questions are the right ones to ask. I think it's very difficult to ask those questions if you don't have a clear map of the technology that you're using and all of the places that the data exists. Creating that overview will immediately reveal a lot of things to you. I think people will be surprised exactly how much of their data is all over the place. And it will also give a helpful impetus to consolidating that and to reducing that. And I would say, coming back to what Charmaine had highlighted, there is more family office technology now than there ever was before, and that's only going to increase, in my opinion. The technology that exists, whether family office specific or generic in the market, is now more powerful than it ever was before. There's never been as much of an incentive to implement technology as there is nowadays. And at the same point in time, if you just need to check a couple boxes when you're doing your provider selection, and you'll be able to sleep really easily, versus potentially rushing into something that looks like it has all the bells and whistles. But it's not only you who gets to ring those bells and blow those whistles, it's other people as well, right?
This is wonderful. With orca.com, please visit the website, check out the technology. This is cutting edge technology with an amazing team behind it. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you, Julia. It's been a
Thank
pleasure.
you, Julia.